She's an A-list star, an Oscar winner with more than her share of drama on and off screen.
I wanted to be a part of something that seemed like it would be a lot of fun to do, but that would also give the viewer a lot of pleasure just to be able to sit back, enjoy the ride.
And you're the ringleader.
Yeah.
Because that's how you roll.
That's how I roll.
Okay.
For years, Sandra Bullock lit up Hollywood with effortless charm, but recently, something changed. She stepped away from the spotlight, leaving fans wondering why one of the most beloved stars of her generation would suddenly go silent. Whispers swirl about heartbreak, hidden struggles, and choices few could endure. What really happened behind the polished red carpets and billion-dollar box office? The truth reveals a journey more haunting and more human than anyone expected. In Hollywood, absence is louder than words. After decades of relentless work, Sandra Bullock's sudden retreat left fans puzzled. At the height of her power, fresh off The Lost City in 2022, another box office success, she announced she was stepping back. No dramatic farewell, no official retirement, just silence. For someone who had once dominated both theaters and streaming platforms, her disappearance sparked endless speculation. Was it burnout? Disillusionment with an industry that often devours its own? Or was there something deeper that she wasn't ready to share? Tabloids tried to fill the gaps, inventing headlines about her health, her fortune, her future. Yet the truth was simpler and more profound. She chose family. For the first time, Bullock was unapologetic about putting motherhood and private life before fame. Still, the question lingered. Why now, after years of balance between career and family? Her absence felt heavier than a hiatus. To understand why Sandra disappeared from screens, we need to look backward, into a childhood marked by loneliness, a climb through obscurity, and the resilience forged long before Hollywood crowned her. Long before red carpets and flashing cameras, Sandra Bullock lived backstage in a very different kind of spotlight. Born in Virginia but raised largely in Europe, she grew up trailing her mother, a German opera singer, through rehearsal halls and concert stages. While other children played outside, Sandra sat in the wings, absorbing the rhythms of music and discipline. By age 5, she was already performing in children's choirs, her childhood shaped more by strict schedules than playgrounds. When the family returned to the United States, the transition was brutal. Sandra's accent clung to every word, and classmates mocked her funny clothes. The teasing was relentless, carving a deep sense of isolation. She often stood at the edges of the room, unnoticed or ridiculed, a feeling that would shadow her for years. Yet in that loneliness, something powerful took root. She developed empathy for the outsiders, the forgotten faces, the ones no one else noticed. That empathy became her secret weapon. It's what later made her characters feel authentic, why audiences believed her as the vulnerable heroine or the determined fighter. Sandra's outsider roots weren't a weakness. They became the foundation of her strength. Sandra's path to stardom didn't begin with a red carpet. It began with blistered hands and ramen dinners in a drafty New York apartment. After leaving East Carolina University just a few credits shy of graduation, she made a bold bet on herself. New York offered opportunity, but not mercy. She worked nights as a bartender, waitress, and coat checker, trudging home exhausted with barely enough to keep the lights on. Auditions came, but the parts didn't. Early projects disappeared into obscurity, tiny films that vanished without a trace. For most, those years might have been the end. For Sandra, they were fuel. Every rejection sharpened her resolve. Every no pushed her closer to the moment she'd finally break through. That break arrived with Demolition Man in 1993, where she held her own alongside Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes. It wasn't the starring role, but it placed her in the frame. Then came Speed. Her audition, armed with nothing but a folding chair and a paper-plate steering wheel, proved unforgettable. The chemistry with Keanu Reeves was electric, undeniable. When Speed exploded into a $350 million box office smash, Sandra went from anonymity to America's newest star almost overnight. Stardom gave Sandra Bullock options, but power meant creating her own. Refusing to remain just a face on the screen, she founded Fortis Films, her own production company, and began shaping stories that mattered to her. Projects like Hope Floats, Miss Congeniality, and 2 Weeks' Notice weren't just hits. They carried her fingerprints as both producer and star. Sandra was no longer simply America's sweetheart. She was a businesswoman steering her career. But with power came risks. When she agreed to star in Speed 2, Cruise Control, critics called it a misstep. Sandra later admitted she only took the role to secure financing for Hope Floats, a project close to her heart. The gamble worked, though it left her weathering one of the biggest critical flops of her career. She laughed it off years later, but the sting lingered. Still, Sandra's resilience never wavered. She understood that setbacks were part of the bargain if she wanted control. Each failure became an investment in her independence. She wasn't just surviving in Hollywood, she was carving her own lane, one choice at a time. In 2010, Sandra Bullock stood on the stage of the Academy Awards, holding the Oscar for The Blind Side. It was the crowning moment of her career, a performance filled with grit and compassion that resonated with millions. The applause thundered. The cameras captured her radiant smile. For a moment, she was Hollywood's queen, proof that decades of hard work and persistence had paid off. But just 10 days later, the crown cracked. Headlines exploded with revelations about her husband's infidelity. What should have been her season of triumph turned into one of the most public heartbreaks in recent memory. Sandra's private devastation was dragged into the open, splashed across tabloids that feasted on the story. Yet even in humiliation, she chose dignity. Away from the cameras, she finalized the adoption of her son, Louis, shielding him from the chaos. Her focus shifted from fame to family, even as she continued to conquer the box office. Gravity soon followed, one of the most successful and lucrative deals in film history, proving she was still a powerhouse. And in the streaming era, Bird Box showed she could command attention anywhere. Sandra's crown had been battered, but her strength only grew sharper. Fame may bring fortune, but it cannot guarantee safety. In June 2014, Sandra Bullock came home to what should have been a quiet night. Instead, she heard noises inside her house and realized a stranger had broken in. Alone, terrified, she locked herself in her bedroom closet and whispered through a 911 call, her voice trembling as every creak of the floorboard drew closer. The intruder, later identified as a stalker, was arrested before he could reach her, but the damage was already done. Trauma doesn't vanish when the police leave. Sandra later admitted she unraveled, plagued by panic attacks and hypervigilance. Even the simplest moments, like looking out a car window, triggered waves of fear. Determined not to pass that fear on to her children, she sought therapy, including EMDR, to slowly reclaim her peace. It was not about pretending the break-in never happened. It was about refusing to let terror define her. For fans who only saw her dazzling smile, the reality was stark. Sandra Bullock lived not just with the pressures of Hollywood, but with the invisible scars of surviving danger in her own home. After years of storms, Sandra Bullock finally found a measure of peace. In 2015, she met photographer Brian Randall when he was hired to capture her son Louis's birthday party. What began as a professional encounter soon deepened into something more enduring. Randall, a former model with a quiet presence, became not only Sandra's partner, but also a steady father figure to Louis and her daughter Lila, whom she adopted the same year. Unlike her earlier, very public relationships, this love was deliberately private. There were no red carpet spectacles, no press tours parading their bond. Friends who saw them together described a new serenity in Sandra, a calmness that had been missing since her painful divorce. Their home became alive with ordinariness, school runs, family dinners, and late-night conversations in the kitchen. For a woman once defined by Hollywood's glare, it was the quiet that felt extraordinary. Sandra had built a family that grounded her, a sanctuary far away from the chaos of tabloids. It seemed, at last, that she had rewritten her story, not as America's sweetheart or as an Oscar-winning actress, but as a mother and partner who finally felt safe. Behind the scenes of that newfound peace, Sandra Bullock was fighting a battle no one knew about. In 2020, her partner Brian Randall was diagnosed with ALS, a cruel and unrelenting disease that strips away the body piece by piece while leaving the mind intact. Rather than sharing the news with the world, Sandra and Brian made a pact of silence. They didn't want Louis and Layla's childhoods defined by whispered countdowns or pity. Sandra quietly stepped back from Hollywood, not because she was finished, but because she had a far greater role to play. Caregiver. Their home became a sanctuary where nurses blended into family life. Music filled the rooms and laughter was protected like treasure. She learned to soothe him through restless nights, feed him when he no longer could, and shield the children from the harshest edges of decline. For years, the public wondered why Sandra had disappeared from screens. The answer was simple, but devastating. She was devoting every ounce of strength to the man she loved. In August 2023, after 3 years of fighting, Brian passed away at 57. For Sandra, it was not just loss, it was the shattering of the family she had finally built. Grief should have been private. But Sandra Bullock's heartbreak collided with public cruelty. Just 9 days after Brian Randall's passing, headlines erupted with a lawsuit tied to The Blind Side, the very film that had earned her an Oscar. Michael Oher, the real-life figure behind the story, accused the Tuohy family of exploiting him. Though Sandra had no involvement in their legal affairs, her name was dragged into the storm. Social media turned merciless. Some demanded she return her Academy Award, as if her performance could be undone by a controversy she had nothing to do with. It was a shocking display of misplaced blame, a reminder of how quickly the internet can turn compassion into cruelty. Sandra, true to form, offered no public tirades, no defensive statements. She chose silence. Her focus remained on her children, on healing from an unimaginable loss. Fans and colleagues rose to her defense, pointing out the absurdity of the backlash, but the noise still echoed, piling on in her darkest season. For Sandra, it was another cruel test, losing the love of her life while the world questioned her integrity. Yet even then, she stood with quiet dignity. Today, at 61, Sandra Bullock lives largely outside Hollywood's relentless glare. She hasn't retired, but she has pressed pause, choosing to focus on her children, Louis and Layla, and the healing that still lies ahead. Her homes across California and Georgia have become sanctuaries, places where the walls hold laughter, not the echo of headlines. Friends describe her as centered, grounded, and fiercely protective of the life she has built for her family. Her routines remain disciplined. Pilates, cycling, and even weekend dance classes help her keep both body and spirit strong. Public appearances are rare, but when they happen, fans note her quiet radiance. It's not the radiance of a star chasing attention, it's the glow of someone who has endured storms and chosen peace. Professionally, she still produces projects through Fortis Films, leaving the door open for a return. But for now, her stage is her home, her greatest role that of a mother. Sandra Bullock may have stepped back from the spotlight, but her influence remains untouchable. Her story is proof that resilience doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers. Sandra Bullock's life has never been defined by red carpets or box office totals. It's been defined by resilience. From the outsider child mocked for her accent, to the struggling actress eating ramen in New York, to the Oscar winner who faced betrayal and loss in front of the world, she has carried each storm with grace. Even in 2023, when grief and public judgment collided, Sandra chose silence, dignity, and love. Today, she reminds us that true strength is not loud, it is steady. Drop a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more forgotten Hollywood tales.